Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Phreology Friday. I'm Aaron Tomlinson, and he is
I am Derrick Day. Good to see you, Aaron.
likewise Derrick.
It's been an interesting week, and I'll tell you about that later. But I'll tell you what's in my glass first. I've made a variation on your tonic, on
Okay.
your lemonade. So in addition to the cayenne pepper, I've added ginger and turmeric
Yeah,
and
nice.
a little bit of cinnamon. And so I was looking at all of the properties for all of these things, like turmeric reduces um, inflammation,
Mhm.
cinnamon reduces or helps to keep your blood sugar regulated, ginger helps with digestion, and of course the cayenne pepper it has some inflammation reduction. Plus, it also has thermogenic effects.
Mhm.
To help you lose weight. Oh, and apple cider vinegar.
Oh,
So
yeah.
uh,
Wow. That's quite a
some of it
concoction. I'm going to have to,
with lemon and stevia,
I'll
and
have to try that.
yeah, and it's really good.
It sounds amazing. Definitely does. I am having hot chocolate because we're fucking freezing our asses off here in Colorado.
Hang on for just a second. Let me let this dog out real quick.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead. Nobody's going out. Dogs like to play head games with me, and they act like they want to go out, and then they don't go out when I open the door. So typically, when I really need them to go out, I have to actually pick them up and take them outside.
Yeah. I'm,
Uh,
I'm, I'm drinking hot chocolate. I have I'm not trying to do the ketosis thing. Did I get that right? Ketosis?
yeah.
It didn't feel right. Um, but I am, because of my infirmity, I am taking diabetic medication, not for diabetes.
Yeah.
I figure I can cheat a little bit on the sugar and
Yeah.
I'll be okay.
Doesn't hurt to have a little.
So, yeah, hot chocolate, still dry January. Well, it's been a dry, going on 5 months for me now.
Yeah. Wow.
Totally wrecked my Phreology Friday.
I'll tell you what, February 1st, I'm having a bourbon. I will have a fucking bourbon.
Yeah, let's see, I go back to the doctor the 13th, I think. So we'll see what they say. I'm expecting a good report. I
I
feel
am
great.
too. I am too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
It's been a
decree
crazy
it by
wild
faith.
ride, man.
What's
Huh?
that? No, what you say at
I
first?
said it's been a crazy wild ride the last 5 months.
Listen, I went through something very similar, and
Yeah.
I completely empathize. But just like me, you're tracking toward recovery. It's like one of those things where something happened, some kind of insult happened to the and it happens.
Yeah.
So
I yeah, I've held on to the details because of all the trolls that I still have out there because
yeah,
just the curse of God. This is
yeah,
because you walked away from Jesus, whatever. So
yeah, and I get that too, man, with the stuff that I've been going through. It's because you walked away from God.
yeah.
Which that brings me to tonight's
Yes,
subject.
yes.
And I I've really been dwelling on this for a minute. I've been chewing on this for a minute because people say I have a theory. Okay, great. And then people will say things like, "Well, I can't believe in evolution because it's just a theory."
Yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
And both of those statements lack any vestige of intellectual honesty.
Hmm.
You know, and so the thing is that you're trying to deal with people dealing with improper etymology and and and, and, and um, the wrong etymology and the wrong rubric. Let's say it that way.
Right.
And so I think that it would be helpful if people understood the difference between a hypothesis and a theory. And there's a very important outcome for this discussion. And it's this, that when you understand the difference between a hypothesis and a theory, now you're giving your beliefs some guardrails. Right. And I'm, I remember back when I was preaching, I used to say, I want to see Jesus without guardrails. I used to preach that, right? But the reality is that pretty much anything you have to have some constraining things, and this is not to say you can't push the envelope. It's not to say you can't adjust or realign the guardrails, because you can, and that's the whole thing about growth. It's like when you redo a road, you reroute a road, you take up the old guardrails and you move them and create new ones, right?
Right.
So likewise, we're doing the same thing. So to start off, what is the difference between a hypothesis and a theory? So in layman's terms, to keep it real simple, a hypothesis is an educated guess. Note that I qualified this, folks. Educated. That means that in order for you to make this guess, this surmisation, you must have a modicum of education in that field. Because if you don't, you're making an uneducated guess, and that's called an assumption. And do I have to bring up what assume actually means? If you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, right? If you just break down the spelling of it. So what I'm trying to do is, first of all, help people to refine, and this will help you, even if you believe in something, even if you believe in God, you believe in some spirituality, whether you're atheist or agnostic, it doesn't matter. Knowing this helps you identify and operate fully in what you believe or have confidence in, right? So that's it. Hypothesis is an educated guess. A theory, on the other hand, is a hypothesis that has been vetted among other educated guessers who have taken that educated guess and tested it and proved whether or not it is viable. Repeatability is a key here. I'll never forget, in the late 80s, early 90s, these two guys from the University of Utah, I don't remember their first names, but their last names were Pons and Fleischman. And they had came out and said, we have achieved nuclear fusion at room temperature. That, my friends, is damn near the holy grail of Newtonian or Einsteinian physics. Because basically nuclear fusion says that you get more power out of a reaction than what you put in. And that only happens by fusing hydrogen atoms together to release helium or other atoms. Now, what happened? They submitted their research for peer review. And guess what? Not a single scientific team was able to repeat that result. Now, Pons and Fleischman, to their credit, they stood their ground. They said, God damn it, we did this. We know we did it. And so the last I heard is that they got hired by some Swiss physics team, and they continue their research over in Europe. Now, We haven't heard anything else from them. Now, the conspiracy theorists would say, well, see, that's because they actually were on to something. And I'm not saying that one way or the other. All I'm saying is that they posited something that was falsified, because science by nature is falsifiable. Now, write that down, kids, because this is a word we're going to use a lot today. Falsify, falsifiable, falsifiability. Because if something is falsifiable, that means it can withstand scrutiny, that it can be proven wrong, and that no arguments will change whether or not it is right or wrong, whether the results are accurate or not. That you can't argue your way out of it. You can't debate your way out of it. And we're going to get to that, because this is my this is my gambit, for lack of a better term. Put this out here, that the reason why religion is such a mind fuck, and I'm not just picking on Christianity, this is religion across the board, that it's not falsifiable. Because the minute that you say, well, the evidence says, then the arguments come. Well, you lack faith, or you didn't study enough, or you're in the wrong atmosphere, or you're with the wrong crew, you're with people who believe wrong. And so what happens is that now you try to resort to logical fallacy to discredit the evidence. Now, this is the thing about science, is this: the way science works is only evidence discredits evidence. Superior evidence will discredit inferior evidence 100% of the time. Flat Earth, what is it? Terracentricity, Earth-centric belief. All of these things have been falsified, right? Things like Maxwell's demon, and how information is transmitted. All of these hypotheses, they've been falsified, and now we say, okay, we have better knowledge. Better knowledge produces better outcomes. So that is my opening salvo. I'm just like, and so May had asked me, she said, why even bother? And there's a reason why I bother, because I said to myself, or I said to her, I think of myself as sort of the Harriet Tubman of religion. Or let me say, not the Harriet Tubman, but a Harriet Tubman, because I'm not the only one. There's you, there's Kyle, there are others, right? And it's this: it gets people free. And why is it important that people get free? It's important that people get free because if you are free, then you don't limit yourself to be governed by those principles. And that means that when someone else tries to govern you by these principles, you have the intellectual ammunition to resist.
Yeah, I like that. I want to pick up on that a little bit more later. So I was looking down, I wasn't texting or anything. I was trying to, and you might be familiar with it, but I came across recently, I don't know what recently means, or even came across. I can't remember if I read it or heard it in a podcast or something, but this hierarchy in science, where you have hypothesis, and then you have theory, and then a hypothesis, and then I think beneath a hypothesis was a notion, and it's kind of ranking these terms in terms of where they stand with one another, right? So what most people consider to be, let's just say, quote unquote, scientific fact is in fact usually a theory. And that's important to talk about, because it kind of illustrates what you're talking about with science in general.
Yeah.
that it is always at least attempting to be open to information that may disprove a previously held belief. So that's why very few things, I mean, if someone's really trained in the sciences, they usually won't use the term fact.
Right.
As a matter of fact,
Right.
They'll use theory.
I'm going to come back to that later too.
They'll use theory in the way most people use fact. I suppose they would talk about laws, maybe a little bit above, scientific laws, maybe a little bit above theory. That's just an Aaronism there. I was Googling, trying to find that hierarchy, asking AI and everything, but I couldn't formulate the question correctly, apparently. Or maybe it's just all bullshit. I don't know. It's something I just dreamed up. It's a notion. It's a notion that I have that there is this hierarchy that exists. But I think, it is, theory is generally understood, I think, in the mind of the general public as really what a hypothesis is, or really even what a notion is, because you bring up a really good point about a hypothesis is a educated guess that then is going to be put to a test, whereas theory is a hypothesis that has been tested over and over and over and over again.
Right.
That's what you're talking about in regards to repeatability. And it's been tested and reviewed, so many times that the overwhelming evidence and the overwhelming data says this is probably how it is. But we're going to leave it as a probably because we're going to be open to new discoveries, new information, new data.
Right.
Which is really hard to, there really is no way to export that to religion.
Right.
Because especially you think about Christianity, we would talk about, I think there's a verse in 2 Peter or something that talks about being true to the faith that is once and for all delivered to the saints.
Yeah.
Or true to apostolic doctrine. And I remember early on in my quest and journey, it was interesting because when I converted, when I was 18 and I converted to Christianity, I came from a Methodist background. I've been thinking about this week, like, how did I become a Pentecostal?
Yeah.
Because it was very unlikely, based on the context of my relationships, that I would have become a Pentecostal, because I was raised in a Methodist family. When we quit going to the Methodist church, we went to the Presbyterian church. I was your typical WASP, I guess you could say, right? Just white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Services were very dry. The preacher went over an hour. The elder that was falling asleep, got his nap. I don't know. Had to nap 15 minutes longer or something. They would get pissed off and have a board meeting and tell the pastor that he better be done by noon.
Yeah.
That's time. And there was although my mom read to us Bible stories and we had a Bible and my mom would read, I remember my mom reading the Bible frequently. I don't know that she did every day, but frequently she read the Bible and taught us from the Bible. But for the most part, compared to a fundamentalist, a Baptist, a Pentecostal, we were pretty biblically illiterate. And so, the Methodist church at the time that I was coming up was really getting slammed for preaching a social gospel and was actually really progressive. I mean, they were arguing. I remember my parents went to a meeting where they argued over the ordination of homosexual ministers. And this is back in the 70s, right? So as far as Christianity goes, it's about as far from fundamentalism, and it's about as progressive as you could get growing up in the 70s. And I remember when I converted, one of my friends that was converting me, I think gave me a book on speaking in tongues. And I was just like, that's too weird. It's too bizarre. That's folk religion.
Yep.
And I remember he said, well, Aaron, the Bible is not a buffet. You either have to take all of it or don't take any of it. So I'm like, okay. So of course he encouraged me to read the book of Acts. So long for lots of reasons. I didn't go back to college in the same place that I started. So I didn't really ever see that friend again. I mean, this is before, any kind of cell phone. I mean, we still had to pay for, you still had to dial a one and pay your long distance fees if you were calling somebody, or if you're going to write it. We still had pen pals back then, where you send letters back and forth. So we kind of lost touch. But I remember reading the book of Acts and reading about all these miracles and all this incredible stuff and thinking, okay, I'm not seeing any of this in my Methodist church.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't hold up to the Methodist church. But one of the things, so what I began to do was I began to resonate with this idea at the time, that there was a faith, there was this pristine faith that was the true apostolic faith that was once and for all delivered to the saints. And instead of thinking progressively, instead of being forward thinking, or even thinking about how does this apply culturally, it was, if I could just get back to the original sources, it would be this pristine, I know there's this pristine, accurate faith that probably got messed up when the Catholic Church got involved. And in my quest, actually, to find that faith that was once and for all delivered to the saints, to go back to first century Christianity, you discovered that it was really a clusterfuck.
Oh yeah, it was a hot mess.
We talk about what is it? I don't know. It grows every time I read it. I think this is one of those things, the tail grows taller on down the line. But it used to be 30,000 denominations, everybody quoted, and then I saw 40, and now it seems like everybody's up to 45. So maybe they've just multiplied that many more times. But the point is, there are some basic things that Christians agree on generally, unless you're like Oneness Pentecostal or something. They generally agree on the Trinity, the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, some of the stuff, Jesus, the only begotten Son of God, all that stuff. That wasn't the case for sure in the early centuries, right? In the early centuries. I want to say that again, centuries.
Right.
So it's really hard if you think there's been this pristine faith that you've been given, or this book that is the Word of God. It's God's love letter to you and to me. Then it's really difficult to, especially if you think it's inerrant, it's without flaw, God never changes. It's just really, the system itself is closed, right? God said it, I believe it, that settles it. I believe the Bible from Genesis to the maps. So, I mean, just philosophically, it's very closed to questions and ideas and new information that would come in that might challenge, especially some of those sacredly, deeply held beliefs. But I want to come back then to how you finished the last part where you were talking about being the Harriet Tubman of religion. And the ultimate, what I heard you say, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What I heard you say was the pinnacle for you is freedom. That you don't have to be subject to someone else's principles as though they really are divinely inspired.
Right.
Which I share that. That's a common value that we share. I think that freedom is important. And I think that freedom terrifies people.
It does.
So this might be steering the conversation in a direction you want to go, so you don't have to take it here. But my question for you would be, and you already kind of defined it, but can you go into more specifically how religion, or having a closed mind about religion, is binding, and how being open to possibilities, being open to more data, being open to falsification, how that's liberating?
Well, when we were in the grace movement, we were anti-religion, right?
Yeah.
And we often said that word religion came from the Latin religere, meaning to bind again, or to bring again into bondage. And that etymology holds up.
Mhm.
That's sustainable. That's falsifiable. uh, but here's the thing that I think, and I've learned to soften my stance on
Yeah.
this. Because before, when I was going through my militant atheist stage, I was just like, I just wanted to dunk on religion, like Michael Jordan dunking on a preschooler.
Yeah.
That was what gave me joy, right?
Right.
But now I'm like, okay, I was wrong for that.
Mhm.
See that? So I make my beliefs falsifiable, right?
Mhm.
That I can be wrong. This is the thing. If you believe something, like I know we've talked about this, like in the case in your case where you've seen the supernatural happen. I've seen the supernatural happen. um, and we could have different opinions about how we believe the supernatural was, how it occurred, how it's manifested. But at the end of the day, the thing about the supernatural is you can't deny that it happened,
Mhm.
because a man with an experience is never at the mercy of a man with an argument. We know that also, right? If you've experienced something, far be it from me to try to shit on that experience.
Right.
But if you say that your experience has to be the governing principle for society at large, then that is an erroneous expression or manifestation of that facet of your belief. And that's the problem that I have with religion, is that personal beliefs are personal beliefs. You believe that God the Father begat his only begotten Son, that all of this is governed by the Holy Spirit, and you believe in that Trinitarian view. That's wonderful. If that works for you, if that gives you peace, I have no problem with it, none whatsoever. That's the me softening my stance. It's not trying to, shake you out of your beliefs per se, but whether that belief needs to be the governing principle for all of society, that's where it goes off the rails. And that's where, my inner Harriet Tubman kicks in. Because if you say, okay, I believe this, and I believe this corporately, and I was asking myself, I ride around, Tulsa, Dallas, they have something in common: big ass churches everywhere,
Mhm.
and a whole lot more little bitty churches.
Right.
And like I kid you not, on Sheridan Avenue in Tulsa, right next door to each other is a church that calls itself Real Church, and the other one is oh god, it's like one of these crazy names. It's like you know it's something, to the effect of the Church of the Holy Spirit kicks ass, or something. It's something crazy. But these are really big churches, and they're right next to each other. And I'm like, okay, why don't these folks get together and say, okay, let's all worship together? You know, and it's because people's individual beliefs have now aggregated and correlated into something corporate. And there's study after study, there's scientific study after scientific study, and this being in psychology, of the mob mentality. You know, this one person may not believe this individually,
Mhm.
but once he's in the mob, he takes on the mentality of the mob. And so that and what happens then is now you have numbers, and numbers are a motherfucker, because we've talked about this, publicly and privately, that you can't argue with the numbers. The numbers don't lie. And they don't. And here's what happens: when you get enough numbers, you begin to believe that there is superiority in what you believe.
Right.
And that superiority doesn't stop with that superiority. This superiority now wants to amass power corresponding to its numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you say, okay, now I have political power. This is how the moral majority worked. In case anybody's wondering, it's like one little preacher here and another preacher here. They get together over lunch and they say, what if we were to aggregate our power? Not necessarily our congregations, because we don't want to do that. Because I know deep down inside that you're a heathen, and you know deep down inside that I'm a heathen, and we're never going to resolve that issue. But we could get together and we can have some political power that says that we're going to impact, influence, and inform government with our particular religious values or some common denominator of our religious values, and that is where it goes off the rails. Now, if you can get this to the point where people say, I no longer feel the need to express these values corporately, that I'm okay with them by myself. And let me say this, that in my opinion, if you get to that point as a Christian, you don't need any more freedom than that. You don't need a Harriet Tubman. You don't need a Sojourner Truth. You don't need that. You don't need a John Brown. You're free, even though you have a religious foundation, you have a belief system that I may not agree with, but you have come to the point where I no longer need to aggregate my faith or my belief in a corporate setting that is bent on amassing power.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the key. Now, if you get to the point where you say, okay, I don't need religion, I can rest my faith or confidence in something metaphysical, something scientific, or something that's free form, that it's a spiritual blob, right?
Uh-huh.
And then I would say that at that point you achieve a higher level of freedom. So like if you're going through Buddhism, you're approaching real enlightenment at that point. But you follow what I'm saying? So the point is that it's getting. The reason why I do what I do, I have a why in this, and I think that having a why in anything is important, because if you don't have why, your how, your what, your when, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
You're basically barking at the wind, or pissing in the wind, or whatever. My why is to help people see all of this for what it really is. Now, and again, I've used Jeff as an example before. I'm going to use Jeff as an example again, because Jeff Turner, to me, is one of the most intellectually honest human beings walking the earth.
Yeah.
He was a man of faith. He pastored a large church. He was an Andrew Womack rising star, all of this good stuff. And then one day he had a crisis of faith, and he said, man, fuck all of this. And he walked away. Walked away. And during his time, I won't say he was a complete atheist, but he was.
I think Jeff would say he was a complete. I think
I know he says he was, but
yeah.
And I won't argue with that. But during the time that he was in that phase, Jeff saw some things, and there were some things that basically caused him to change the rudder of his ship of faith. And he went back to Christianity, but now he's gone back to Christianity with a more intellectually honest viewpoint. In other words, all of the religious baggage, all of the, you have to do this, and all of these tenets and principles that basically keep people in bondage. Jeff's like, I don't need all of that. I'm okay with the vision of the Jesus of love, and I'm going to go with that. And that, to me, when people get to that point and they say, I don't, Jeff isn't trying to pastor any churches anymore. He's not doing that. Rob Bell is another guy. Rob Bell, walked away from a church of 5,000 people. He was a rising star. And then he caught this revelation, love wins. And he says, okay, I'm good without all the trappings, right? Carlton Pearson is another one. Carlton Pearson, pastored a church of thousands, but influenced millions. There were people that Carlton Pearson was in such great demand. And then he said, no, this is that a God that would send people to hell is no God at all.
Mm-hmm.
And when he said that, Carlton went from, he got freedom from the plantation, because now he's not bound by doctrines. He's not bound by rules. He's not bound by any of this. He's free. So the whole thing is, for me, again, is to help people get free. Mm-hmm. And so, and I the one thing that I will say between you and I, and between people that we co-labor with, for lack of a better term, that we've done a good job of liberating probably thousands of people. Yeah. I mean, helping people to get the freedom that they need to practice spirituality in a way that is not constraining. Now, I talked about guardrails earlier, and this is the thing, right? People build houses on the Mississippi River. Mm-hmm. They've been building houses on the Mississippi River since they discovered the Mississippi River, right?
Yeah.
And every few years, the banks of the Mississippi overflow. And so we've had everything from geologists to the Army Corps of Engineers trying to figure out how to mitigate the damage that happens when the Mississippi floods over, and they haven't been able to figure it out. Why? Because water finds its own level. And over time, with the changes in plate tectonics and the changes in geography and all of this geology, the Mississippi River is constantly changing directions. And it's not only doing that, but it's forming new tributaries and other branches that spread into lakes and ponds. It's a living thing. Mm. So here's the thing. You can't just put a house on the river and not expect that at some point it might be washed away. Mm-hmm. That's it. And so what happens is the effective net of religion is like building a house on a living river like the Mississippi and expecting that it's never going to change, expecting that it's never going to flood out. And what happens is that you place confidence in your building, you place confidence in your location, you place confidence in the Corps of Engineers reports.
Yeah.
Because I don't buy a house without looking at the Army Corps of Engineers floodplain maps. I don't. That if I buy a piece of, I'm never buying anything below sea level. Mm-hmm. I don't do that. Mm-hmm. Because I like insurance, right?
Right.
So the thing is, all of these things, you can put confidence in all of that, but at the same time, nature has a way of overriding your plans. So here's what happens. This is where God comes in. Mm-hmm. The God of the gaps. Yes, I know that I'm on the river. Yes, I know that my house is not the best construction. Yes, I know that the Army Corps of Engineers has said this and the geologists have said this, but I trust God. Mm-hmm. Okay, so watch this. God is not falsifiable. Because if you try to prove that God doesn't exist, or if you try to contend, I won't even say prove, if you try to contend that God doesn't exist, then what happens is that the appeal to authority, the ad hominems, the red herrings, and all, you're going to get a slew of logical fallacies that are trying to justify this. but you can't actually subject this to scientific scrutiny. Now, here's the thing. Now, watch this. The religious folks will say, well, you obviously cannot subject God to some scientific theory. And to that, I would say, okay, by that same token, we can't subject the universe, galaxies, solar systems, celestial phenomena, planets, or satellites. In other words, if I can't falsify, I can't prove any reliability because I can't prove any repeatability, and that's the thing that I'm getting at. If you believe, that's fine, but you can't expect others to believe in something that you yourself cannot repeat consistently. I hope I didn't go around my elbow to make the point, because I talked a lot, and I want to stop here, but that's and I'm hoping that I answer your question too.
Yeah, you're prompting more questions for me. So let me ask a few questions.
Yeah.
As far as like hypothesis and theory and religion, do religious people have hypotheses and theories?
You know what? They
Like,
don't.
what's the relationship? Like, what's a hypothesis, or what's a theory, or what's a notion when it comes to?
Here's the thing: a hypothesis is an educated guess, right?
Right.
So, what did you just say earlier? You said God said it. I believe it. That settles it.
Right.
That was me and you,
right,
a few years back. So when we say that, we're saying that we decree immunity to any falsifiability.
Okay.
Right. So if you decree that that you're immune to falsifiability, then what you're saying is you don't have a hypothesis or a theory at all, because your hypothesis would say, I think this, or I've observed this. And so then you say, okay, well, I'm going to submit this as to peer review. I'm going, so like, let's say I'll use myself as an example. I observe something. Then I say, Aaron, I observe X. What do you think about this? And you say, okay, well, what were the parameters? How did this happen? What was the environment? What are the situations, circumstances? Right. So then I owe you that, because then that helps you to form a test plan.
Sure.
Right? And then if I say I go to Kyle, or I go to Daryl, or I go to Jermaine, I go to Jamel or Vanessa, and I say, hey, test this out, guys, test this out. Okay. Religion doesn't do that. It doesn't do that. What religion does is it comes up with some principle, and they try to use that to steamroll everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Christian colleges and seminaries are all about. Yeah. Or not just Christian, religious schools and seminaries. It's all about steamrolling everyone else with this particular position.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say, is that they don't have a hypothesis or theory, because they're unwilling to submit something to scrutiny to be falsified.
Yeah. So just to make it a little more practical, not that this isn't practical, but maybe a little bit more down to where people live. And here's why I'm thinking this way, Derrick, because I'm never going to publish a paper ever.
Yeah.
About anything. I can't imagine conducting any kind of research project. Your average person out there doesn't even know how to read or doesn't even know how to read a paper. I mean, let's just be honest.
Yep.
They wouldn't know a well-constructed experiment from a poorly one. They wouldn't even know what an abstract is. If I said abstract, they're going to think I'm talking about art or something like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So for those people, in other words, most of what we believe, it never goes through that process.
Well,
no
you know
matter
what?
what it is.
I would,
Because
I would,
because
I
no,
would
because most people aren't like us, and most people aren't like you. They're not listening to books on tape, or if you can't even read a research project. And you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is, if you have an idea or a hypothesis, you need to submit that for scrutiny
Mhm.
and peer review. But most people don't even know what that means.
Well, here's the thing, right? So like if you look at, let's look at your average street drug dealer,
Okay.
right? And someone would say, okay, all crack dealers do X, Y, and Z. Let's say that they find a product, they scout out a territory, they build a crew,
Mm-hmm.
and then they try to expand,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a hypothesis. It's an educated guess based on street knowledge. Now,
Okay.
what happens is that this process happens, and somebody goes and says, okay, that's the way to build this kind of business. Let me go and try this. So there have been enough street drug businesses built according to this paradigm to prove that this hypothesis is true, right? So now we say that in order that building a successful drug business requires X, Y, and Z, and you can and this is an empirical, repeatable result. The thing is that a lot of people follow the scientific method without even trying. I mean, even if you think about like if you wash clothes and you add let's say you add borax
Mm-hmm.
and OxyClean
Mm-hmm.
to your whites,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that when you use the borax and the OxyClean, that you're going to get whites as white as if you use bleach, but they don't decompose the fabric enough times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, somebody posts that on Pinterest, and somebody tries it, and enough people try it.
Yeah. Okay. I hear what you're saying, and I'm just
No. It's okay. That's an important question to ask because
let me
what you're
let me
saying is that okay, Derrick, you're trying to express something here, and everybody else is like here, and you're missing the audience. No, basically the scientific method. Okay, so I heard this today. It said that I think Niels Bohr said this. It said that the scientific the scientific method is just common sense applied scholastically. I mean, he said something like that.
Quote. Yeah, I'm not saying you're missing the audience, but I am pushing. I'm just, I don't know, being devil's advocate, I guess.
No, that's fine.
But I really want this to like get where most people live. So I'm going to throw something else at you. Okay, because I hear your illustrations. Cool. I go to a church that has testimony time.
Yep.
And I hear testimony after testimony. Public speakers, preachers, that are brought in. I lived my life this way. I found Jesus anyway, from somebody shared the gospel with me to I opened a Gideon's Bible at a hotel to Jesus appeared to me in my bedroom. And I hear that over and over and over again. Isn't that evidence? Isn't that repeatability? Isn't that the same as reading something on Reddit and saying, okay, I'm going to try this and see if this works for me?
Okay.
Isn't that then in that sense, because it's not well constructed or peer reviewed, the same as common sense scientific method for those people who are experiencing those things and hear those testimonies over and over again?
And no. And here's why, right? It's not something that's repeated. Let me say this. So like if you have a church, right, and and it's testimony time, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
I don't know if churches do that anymore, but
they still
do.
They still do. And this is what I would say that is that okay. if it works in church A, it's got to work in church B. You know, because if we say that the qualifier here is faith, right, and fidelity to the word, right, then the result should be the same. But what'll happen is, again, people will say, okay, those other churches believe wrong, or they ain't praying right, or they're not studying the word right. So what they're doing now is they're trying to beg to differ, rather than trying to actually repeat the process. So now what you have is basically a situation that's based on appeal to authority, right? And you're operating in A, cognitive dissonance, and B, confirmation bias. In other words, I'm only going to believe what I think confirms what I've seen here. It's not diffuse. In other words, again, let me go back to the drug dealer experiment, right?
Right.
Because we see this pattern repeating itself, not just in the United States, but in Mexico, in Brazil, in England, in sub-Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia. The principle, no matter where it's tried, works. It doesn't. The principle is uncaring of who's actually doing it. But see, when you have the testimony, now it matters who's doing it. Well, we have a preacher who's preaching better. We have teachers who are teaching better. We got people who are studying better, right? And it's not just, okay, this natively repeats itself, because the thing is that the drug trade doesn't even care whether you're a Christian or not. It doesn't care whether you're atheist. It doesn't care whether you're Muslim. And there are people of all faiths that are out here slinging crack. It works. I mean, I'm just using that to say.
Yeah. Marietta, I just saw a couple comments come up. Marietta says, would that be anecdotal evidence? I assume that is referencing testimonies.
Yeah, testimony is absolutely anecdotal evidence. And here's the thing. There is anecdotal evidence that could be absolutely correct. It has happened. A lot of times a scientific hypothesis begins with observation of anecdotal evidence. It's just that anecdote now is subjected to greater scrutiny, and then you move on. So anecdotal evidence in and of itself is not bad. It's and I'm going to use my three favorite words: tangible, measurable, and repeatable. Right. And again, so like, let's say somebody sees the visage of a loved one, and the scientific mind would probably say, oh no, ghosts don't exist. You didn't see that. This was all in your mind, right? Well, it may have actually happened. And there may not be a good explanation for it, at least not right now. But you can't take away someone's experience. You can't say, well, that's just bullshit. That's not the right answer either. The answer would then be, okay, is there a way to falsify this? And by falsifying it, I'm not just saying, well, you go to that person and say, grow up, dude, stop believing in fairy tales, get a grip. And that's not falsifying. Falsifying is looking at the evidence and walking it back and saying, okay, can this be repeated? Now, even if it can't be repeated, doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It didn't mean that person didn't have that experience. This is my softened approach to this, right? Because if you had
very softened, by the way, Derrick, it really is.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. I'm chuckling because I'm thinking back to Throat Punch, Derrick.
I've really softened my approach to this. So
Ah,
I don't take it. I don't take away from people's experience.
right.
If you saw healing or you got healed or whatever, great, that's fine. But you can't say, okay, this has to be a governing principle. It cannot be a governing principle because it cannot be expressed or manifest,
Yeah.
in a uniform way.
So, what do you think? What are some key tenets, some key beliefs that? I guess the question is twofold. What are some key beliefs, and then what is the evidence, or what are the beliefs? I'm trying to think how to phrase this question. I'm trying to think of a belief that then is put to scrutiny
Mhm.
in that way and doesn't hold up. What are some of them, do you think? Does that question make sense? Did the way I say that make sense?
Yeah. So again, so like the scientists in the 19th century believed that there was something called luminescent ether
Mhm.
that basically surrounded everything, and this was their explanation as to why light diffuses into different colors as if through a prism, right? And so they believed that this ether was everywhere, that it was even in a vacuum, because like one of the things that we find is that light actually travels. We know what the speed of light is, but light expresses itself differently in air or water or oil than it does in a vacuum. In a vacuum, in a pure vacuum, the speed of light is the speed of light. In any one of those other medium, the speed of light is reduced, right? So again, what 19th century scientists believe that, okay, that there is some kind of ether. So we find out that there is no ether. You know that that bodies are, that basically celestial bodies are suspended in space, and space is essentially a vacuum. Okay. So that's one of those things that was a belief that was proven false. Another one. This is a really good one, that black people were inherently intellectually inferior to whites,
Mhm.
right? And so there was a lot of eugenic theory, and what do you call that? Where they phrenology, where they look at skull configurations and things like that, and they found out that all of these things were like pseudoscience
Mhm.
that really had they themselves failed the falsifiability test, and we know that these things are not true. Or um, there was a thing about women in combat, particularly women flying combat jets. It,
Yeah.
and all of these things, these are beliefs that that fell apart. Or
So,
a big one now, that if we let people talk about homosexuality, people are going to be converted to homosexuality.
yeah,
Okay,
right.
again, it's like these are all things that were once believed to be true, but the science has borne them out to be nonsense.
So, what are some contemporary Christian beliefs that won't stand up to scrutiny? Or, so in other words, you switched from, preaching like me
Uh-huh.
to militant atheist. That's a process that we both went through. We've talked about
Yep.
this a ton on our channels and
Yep.
whatever. So, what are some of the key ones or main ones that you think, people believe this and this is really toxic currently, presently,
Mhm.
and it can be refuted, or it does not stand up to scrutiny because of this?
The creation account,
Okay.
that's one. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny because where we are able to trace back the lineage of humanity. And again, we don't have this perfect scientifically, but there is sufficient evidence to support theories of a mitochondrial Eve from which all humanity sprung from. So, and that's incongruent with the creation account. or the biblical flood, which the biblical flood is a story that actually exists in many different cultures. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Book of the Dead, the Greek pantheon, even Native American. There are Native American accounts of this, but there is no geological evidence based on what we know about where water was. Like a great example is the state of Arizona. The state of Arizona, we know geologically that this was once covered by a salty sea, right? And there's evidence of that because you go out in the desert and you'll find fossils of sea creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how do they get there? Well, that's so there are robust theories that that refute that, or the day that the earth the time stood still for Joshua. There's no evidence, there's no scientific evidence supporting that. Science refutes that. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now there's evidence of a meteor shower in that geographical area around that specific time. Okay, so again, all of these things where and then my favorite one that everybody hates me for, and it's this one. Where is Jesus? Because this is one of these ones that if you believe this, now I'm listen again. If you believe in the teachings of Jesus and you believe that unconditional love and that the revelation of creation is love, good on you. But there is neither archaeological nor anthropological evidence of a historical Jesus. That it doesn't exist. And this is something that theological scholars are wrestling with, because now they're kind of backed into a corner, because they used to be able to play the Josephus card and say, well, Josephus discussed it and he was a contemporary of Jesus. Well, no, he wasn't. He was born after Jesus died. And the Testimonium Flavium, where that passage of text in the Wars of the Jews, that is considered by all scholars, almost all scholars, is universally held as bogus. So that and if you say, okay, well, if there's no Jesus, and that's the basis of your faith, then what is your faith really hinging on? And so again, these are all things where science, I believe, has disputed biblical facts or biblical renderings, biblical accounts.
Yeah, I think the most important takeaway for me, this was fun, by the way. It's more like I'm putting all the pressure on you to talk tonight.
That's okay. I can take it, man.
I know you can. I think what's important is I think we should be very cautious of any environment, whether it's religious, political, scientific, that does not encourage free thought and questions, that does not encourage challenge, right? And also the way religion has been weaponized, specifically Christianity. And again, I'm only speaking to Christianity because it's what I'm the most familiar with. Because I can hear
Islam too, to be fair.
Yeah, I can hear these other arguments like, well, like if I'm teaching my children, and I want them to learn ethics and morals that are, generally accepted and healthy. But do unto others, right? Generosity, care for the widow and the orphan, whatever the thing is, right? My mind just went to never mind. I don't even want to open that can of worms. It's just amazing to me how someone can stand up, this bishop lady, and stand up and talk about, to me, what is basic Christian
Yep.
teachings of Jesus. And then to see on Facebook people saying she's of Satan and she's leading people to hell, and it's just mind blowing to me. But here's what I can hear. I can hear in my head, people saying I'm giving my kids something that will give them guardrails, give them moral and ethical guardrails, and will also give them an anchor to sustain them. Because I've heard this argument, and I think it's a good one. It gives them an anchor to sustain them through storms and difficult times in their life, et cetera, and so on. And I don't think anybody would argue that those are bad things, right? But I think that completely ignores what I would call the shadow side of Christianity, which includes things like the Crusades, things like the Inquisition, things like the witch trials, especially, in this country and over in the UK especially. It completely discounts those things, ignores those things. That's why I would call it the shadow side. But I think we tend to think, well, but that's not happening today, or that couldn't happen today. But yet those same forces, like, I don't know why we think just because we're more advanced technologically or we're more enlightened or whatever, I don't know why we think that we're immune to those same forces operating in society today. And so it doesn't, and for me, it doesn't have to be weaponized to the extent of an inquisition or I'm going to kill you for being a heretic, or I'm going to burn you at the stake for being a witch. I know so many people that are just bound up in fear because of perceived moral failures, because of I'm afraid I committed the unpardonable sin, or Jesus said, this one got me, a lot, where Jesus says in Matthew, not all that call me Lord, Lord will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those that do the will of my Father, and he said a strong implication there that there are going to be people on Judgment Day
who thought they were doing the right thing.
They were doing the right thing, thought they were following Jesus, and just kidding, I never knew you, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. And that's an existential terror that feeds upon people. So I think we have to, and again, this is where I would say, like, the what did you call it? I don't know why my brain is just, I need to eat some food or something. But
you need booze, man.
That's what I need. That's exactly what I need. Where it's not being tested or standing up to criticism, because it's very easy to focus on, okay, here's all these healthy things that I see, here's all these good things. I'm reminded of a study I think that Yale or one of those Ivy League institutions did on they measured the hippocampus in people who were religious, and they found that people who practiced a modicum of religion had larger hippocampuses, had healthier brains in this study. That's what they found.
Yep.
Than, say, atheists.
Yeah.
However, people who practiced a religion that had any kind of fear in it, so Catholicism was included in this, Christian fundamentalism, so I always throw the Baptists and the Pentecostals together in that basket.
Yep.
They had a smaller hippocampus than anybody else in the study.
Yep, that makes sense to me.
And so it's those binding sides, to bring us full circle. It's those binding sides of things. It's the toxic elements that are introduced, and that's what makes it so dangerous, because there's this good aspect over here. It's almost like the bait on the fish hook, right? And you bite the bait, and then the next thing you know, for some people, not for everybody, but for some people, they end up somebody's dinner. Literally, with their tithe and whatnot. But so for me, that's kind of the importance, like encouraging people. It's okay to not know everything. You said something, I don't know if you said it when we were, is on air the right term? Probably not the right term, really dating myself. But before we were talking before the show,
Mhm.
you said, if I have a hypothesis and it's proven wrong, that doesn't make me an asshole.
Right.
That doesn't make me an idiot.
Yeah. This meant that I started with the wrong set of evidence, or my testing method was wrong. It says that something I did to posit my hypothesis was not correct.
Right.
You know, and let me say this too about this, because you had talked about laws, right? So like you have the law of gravity and the E equals MC squared and all of these other things, right?
Mhm.
And these things have withstood the test of time. But there are a lot of laws that scientific laws, physical laws, that have changed over time, and likewise there are social laws that have changed over time. And that's the thing. We in order to adequately formulate a hypothesis and subject it to the peer review that renders it theory, you have to be willing to hold on to it loosely.
Yeah.
You can't doggedly say, this is it, right? Because it was funny how when Einstein first introduced his theory of special relativity, I was reading or listening to another audio book where the author said that the boldest ideas must withstand the toughest scrutiny.
Hmm.
And when Einstein postulated E equals MC squared, it was so radical, so revolutionary, that literally everybody in the scientific world went about trying to tear this apart.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it withstood the test of time. Now you fast forward into the quantum world, and you go like Niels Bohr's or like Werner Heisenberg. Heisenberg postulated his theory of probability, and again, the scientific world, they went at this. They were tearing, trying to tear this apart. Schrodinger and his and it's funny because Schrodinger he had science to back up his theory of superposition, but he was really approaching this from a philosophical bent. He just had math to back up his philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it was such a bold idea. Bell's theorem, same thing. These things were so bold that when they were submitted,
Mm-hmm.
the scientific community was not just, oh, this is nice, let's see if we can. No, they're like, this is bullshit, I'm going to tear it up. And so watch this. When Niels Bohr came to Einstein and said, okay, regarding your theory on general relativity, I have some issues with that. And he began to posit his quantum theories, and Einstein tried to tear Bohr's apart. I mean, these guys were on tour like rock stars, doing lectures about who was right.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, they found that both of them were right, but for different reasons,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the thing is that even if you put forth a hypothesis, and again, I'm looking at like Pons and Fleischmann. I talked about them earlier. These guys said, hey, nuclear fusion at room temperature. I mean, you got, if you know anything about physics, you know that this is a holy grail thing, right? And they put it to they submitted it for peer review, and the scientists went after it and they shredded it. Now, does this mean that Pons and Fleischmann need to turn in their academic credentials and that they are total frauds and charlatans? No, it just means that they got this one wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing about a hypothesis or a theory. Now, let me say this, because again, nobody has put together what I would call an adequate hypothesis or theory regarding any religion. They haven't put forth anything that can be measured, that can be quantified, that can be tested, that can be falsified. It doesn't exist, because even if someone says, okay, I'm going to take this idea and I'm going to give it these parameters and I'm going to test it and it fails. Okay, great. So I'm going to give it to 5 other people and it fails 5 times, right? And then you go back to the religious institution, they're going to say, well, you just, you're operating on man's knowledge, not God's. You simply lack faith. You don't have the conviction. You weren't taught properly. You didn't study properly. And they're going to come up with every reason why their position is unfalsifiable. And anything that is unfalsifiable is not worthy of consideration. I'm sorry. Again, if you look at it from a personal standpoint, okay, great. If it works for you personally, great. But when we talk about expanding that, scaling that out to something where it can be used as a tool of governance to a wider population, no, you cannot. That's the thing. Like you talk about economic theory, you talk about capitalism, you talk about socialism, you talk about communism. All of these theories have been tested, and they've had their successes and their failures. Why? Because they're all falsifiable. So therefore, or you could say the principles of the Republican Party or the principles of the Democrat Party, they've all been tested. And they've been falsified, and so they have parts of it that work, parts of it that don't. And so the scientific method holds up for those things, and because the scientific method holds up for those things, they are viable governance models, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah, I don't have anything left.
Well, I want to say this in closing. This is my closing salvo, right?
Yeah.
Because what we call facts really aren't facts. There's no such thing as a fact. There are theories that exist and that they have proven themselves over the test of time. The theory of gravity, people say, well, the law of gravity, gravity is, we call it a law because it's so robust, so pervasive, that it's withstood the test of time. But it's not really a law. Listen, these Navy pilots saw something that moved at approximately 45,000 miles per hour. And it changed altitude from 12,000 to 70,000 feet in like seconds. This is something that physically, with the math that we understand, with the scientific principles that we understand today, that is impossible. And yet they saw it. And this is something that, now the thing is that is it tangible? Yes. Is it measurable? Yes. Is it repeatable? No. Because we haven't seen this phenomenon happen in the same way multiple times.
Right.
So what we need to do is we need to be very careful in our word usage. And that's part of why I suggested this topic, because a lot of times we say, well, I have a theory. No, you don't have a theory. You have a hypothesis. And honestly, if you're not starting from a position of having some knowledge about the subject, you really don't have a hypothesis. You have an assumption, and assumptions are dangerous, because what happens is that that an assumption told boldly enough can be accepted as truth. And Joseph Goebbels got that. Joseph Goebbels and Donald Trump, they got that really right. So just because it's bold and it's rendering, it doesn't mean that's factual.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, we don't have facts. We have theories. We have theories that given a sufficiently long timeline, they've withstood that test of time. And we don't. And truth is relative.
Yeah.
You know, and that's probably a fodder for another show. You know, because truth isn't a true north.
I wanted to hit on the like if you repeat something over and over again, people will believe it. It doesn't even have to be nefarious.
Right.
You know, it doesn't even have to be.
It could be totally good, but
Yeah. I mean, I just did something. I don't remember where. Last week, either on in the New Day Global group or on my page, where I talked about some fallacies. They're very common fallacies. One of them being the right and left hemispheres of the brain and their functions, and that's completely false. You know, say if you're right-brained, then you're creative and emotional and imaginative or whatever, musical. If you're left-brained, then you're logical, linear, and that's just not true. That's just completely false. But it's benign, right? It's like, okay, we're identifying. This is why I think the map is not the territory is so important. Because we're identifying differences in temperament or different functions of us as human beings, and then we're falsely assigning it to left hemisphere, right hemisphere. It really doesn't matter where the activity takes place. At least it doesn't matter to me. But what's interesting, and again, I'm not trying to be offensive to anybody, but a lot of people then will try to take that principle and work it into scripture or work it into their religious beliefs, dogmas. You know, Jesus cast the net over on the right side. That means we need to become right-brained people. Okay, so you're telling me that I need to subject my logical, linear, critical thinking side to this more imaginative, intuitive side by simply saying, this is what the left does, this is what the right does, and Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father. And so it's just showing that we need to, you know, activate the right hemisphere of the brain, and it's all bullshit. You know, the latest research basically is saying that the hemispheres perceive differently. They don't function differently. They see things in different ways. But you know, so I guess I'm just saying, like, we can build falsehood on top of falsehood on top of falsehood. At the end of the day, a lot of this stuff probably doesn't matter. I don't care if, you know, people want to see connections in scripture or wherever between the right hemisphere, left hemisphere, or wherever. It's just funny to me that another one that's a pet peeve of mine is, you know, 76% or whatever it is. It's always some really high number of communication is nonverbal. That's total bullshit. And that's self-evidently bullshit. And that study, if I remember correctly, was a study that was done with dogs, not human beings. But it's self-evident. If somebody were to turn off the volume on our podcasts and just watch our facial expressions and our body language, like I'm doing this with my hand and I'm smiling right now, I raise my eyebrows. But if you don't know what I'm saying without language, you have no clue what I'm trying to say or express myself. So the vast, vast majority of communication is verbal. It's not nonverbal. The truth is, if you're incongruent, meaning that your nonverbals contradict your verbals, then more often than not, the nonverbals are telling you the truth. That's the truth about body language and language. But this idea that, you know, whatever it is, and I've heard different statistics, you know, 82%, 72%, 60, you know, I've never even heard it in the 60s. I don't think it's always been 70 or above is nonverbal. And that's just total bullshit. But most people believe that, especially if they've had a communication class or a speech class or, you know, whatever.
So this was a good discussion. I you know, I walked away from a lot with a lot, but you know, the one thing I want to say, and I want to emphatically say this to all my religious brothers and sisters, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, whatever. You know, I have no further desire to try to dunk on anybody's religion. I don't. Your beliefs are your beliefs. And as long as your beliefs are local to you, you know, you are just, I would consider you as enlightened as I am, because I can't really say that I'm just head and shoulders over anyone else. It's like if you are experiencing freedom in your life, great. But when you take this localized belief, which is basically your belief is part of your GDP as the nation of you, and when you take that and export it by force to other nations, then you're in error. You are wrong. But as long as you know you're producing that faith and that faith is working for you, you're consuming that faith. Hey, good on you, mate. Keep it up. Keep on trucking. But if you're using it to try to influence or impact anyone else, you know, and let me say this too, because I want to say this. I sometimes I could be accused of the same thing, of trying to influence or inform or impact others with my beliefs. And at the end of the day, I don't care whether you believe like me. I don't care whether you think like me. I don't. I do care that you do think.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I do care that your beliefs are local to you. And that's where I'll stop.
Good stuff, man. All right. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
Not a whole lot of comments tonight. I went and looked on your page, and it's only 2 comments there, and it's 3 comments here. So, but hopefully people will come back and watch this one, because I think this is one that if you watch this, like Bill Cosby said in Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, if you ain't careful, you might learn something before we're done. Hey, hey, hey.
Well, we had the professor in the house tonight for sure. It was good stuff.
Man, listen, it's working with you, man, brings out the best in me. So,
all right, brother. I love you. Everybody, all 5 of you that commented. No, all 8 of you that are watching.
Yeah.
You that are watching. Thanks for spending your time with us. We really do appreciate you.
Indeed.
Whether you're watching it live or by replay.
Yep.
And hopefully growing in real time with us.
And on that note, love y'all. Peace and hair grease. See you next week.
Peace out. Maybe.